We could, of course, ask ourselves, is thinking a bad thing? Is thought a bad thing? Would it be good to get rid of it? Would we be happier without it? And if so, how do we go around getting rid of thinking? But this question is suspect because the question, is thought a bad thing, is itself a thought. So we're not going to get anywhere like that. We're never going to get anywhere like that. So we really can't start off in that kind of a way. What we can say about thought, however, is something that has been said lots of times, and that is that thought is a very good tool or a very good instrument, but an absolutely terrible master. So that way we're not saying it's good or not, and we're not saying it's bad. We're being a bit more subtle about it. We don't need to spend so much time arguing about why thought is a good instrument, a good servant, because we pretty much know that, since that's the way we would tend to think about thought anyway, that it's a very useful thing. And we do put thought on a pedestal. We do idolize thought in that way. So really the more interesting question is, why is it such a bad master? Why is thought a terrible master? Allowing, that is, for the question of whether you actually agree with that particular statement. And if we go along with that statement, we can say quite a few things that are interesting in that regard. One is to say, the most basic thing to say is that thought operates by putting stuff in boxes. Or we could say that thought operates by defining things. It distinguishes things, makes things clear, it makes them stand out, it gives clarity in a particular way. And that can be useful. Just as if I'm looking at a picture taken from a security camera and I can't really make anything out, so I put it through some kind of program to help resolve the information that's in it. That can be useful. It can make things stand out that weren't standing out before. So that's the obvious good thing about thought, the fact that it defines, and that helps us to know what to do, or it helps us to know what's going on. But where the problem is, and we don't tend to see this, is that if thought is allowed, it will define everything, because it only takes stuff seriously when it defines it. It's kind of like a mincing machine that wants to mince everything, because it's a mincing machine. So thought defines, it's a machine that defines, and it will define everything, for the simple reason that thought itself doesn't know when it stops being useful to define and when it starts being harmful to define. There is a line there. So if I was talking about a lawnmower, when is it useful to use a lawnmower and when is it not? So we all know that anyway. So we mow the lawn, that's useful. But then when we're coming back to the house with the lawnmower, we don't want to have it running when we bring it in the house or put it in the shed, because that's not useful. So who calls the shots there? Clearly the lawnmower doesn't, unless it's some kind of futuristic AI guided lawnmower, which may be a thing one day, but we won't worry about that right now. Just supposing it's a normal kind of petrol engine lawnmower that you push. So obviously, who decides when it's helpful and appropriate and useful to mow and when it's not, no longer helpful and useful, appropriate? Well, we decide that. Such an obvious thing to say. We probably wouldn't spend much time thinking about that. So we just turn the lawnmower off and we put it in the shed, and that's the end of it. But things are very different with thought, because who decides what the limits of applicability or the limits of pragmatic usefulness are to thought? Who decides that? So in the case of the lawnmower, I'm boss. I tell that damn lawnmower when it's time to be turned off. I'm the boss. I know more than the lawnmower. I'm able to make that call. But with thought is no more able to know the limits of its applicability than a lawnmower is. But the problem is, there's no one there to call the shots anymore, because if thought is the master, thought calls the shots. So then if thought decides when thought is useful and when it's no longer needed, the question is, well, when is it going to do that? Under what circumstances is it going to do that? And the answer very plainly is, it is never going to do that. It's never going to say, well, this is not my territory. This isn't, this is beyond my remit. I'm not going to do this. Thought cannot do that. Through no badness of its own, it's just an impossibility. No instrument, no tool can know what the limits of its own applicability are. And thought certainly can't. So the end result is that thought naturally assumes that everything is its business. And we know this. Of course, thought assumes everything is its business. Thought never switches off. It is running things from when we wake up to when we go to sleep. Thought is always running things. And it never ever says to us, I'm not really needed here, I'll just step back a little bit. It'll never do that, because that's not its job. That's not the job of the tool, that's the job of the user of the tool. But when thought is the boss, there is no user of the tool. So we could say, okay, but I'm the user. I could say I'm the user, but I'm not if thought is the master, because I'm no longer there. Instead, what is there is thought's image of me, i.e. my idea of myself, which is a thought. So my idea of myself isn't who I am. It's just part of the program. It's another thought, just like all the other thoughts. Hundreds and hundreds of thoughts. And the thought of who I am, the thought of identity, is no different from any other thought. And so because it's no different from any other thought, it can't be relied upon to set limits for thought and decide when thought is no longer useful. So straight away we're into a territory where who I really am, which is not a thought, has been completely excluded. And because thought is the master, the idea that there might be something that isn't my idea of myself is completely is a complete anathema to me, because when I'm operating on the basis of thought, I have a great loyalty to my idea of myself. I'm very, very loyal to it. And we can see this because if there's ever a question of this idea of myself having to come to an end, that's really frightening. That's the last thing I would want, because I'm identified with that image. And because I'm identified with a thought-created image of who I am, I don't want to know about anything else, because anything else is a threat. It's a complete and utter threat. So we have a situation where thought has defined absolutely everything, including who we are, which means that everything is just thought. Everything is just thought, and thought is a closed system. Thought's a closed system because it can only relate to the world when the world has been put into categories, put into boxes. When the world has been put into boxes, the appropriate box, each box with a little label, I can relate to it. I can say, yes, this is real, this is good, this is bad, this is neutral, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to ignore it or whatever. And that's a closed circuit. It's just chasing itself around and around and around. There is absolutely no way, when we're operating on the basis of thought, that we can conceive or imagine any sort of reality that isn't a thought. Which isn't to say that we go around the place thinking, okay, here's a thought of my friend, here's a thought of my car, here's a thought of the house, here's a thought of my life. Because we no longer see that the thoughts are thoughts. Because at this stage we've lost the perspective to see that, because all we know are thoughts. We don't know our thoughts to be thoughts, which is like saying, when we're totally immersed in the game, then of course we don't know the game to be a game. So that is exactly our situation. This is a dangerous situation. There's a problem in it because we've actually created a situation with no reality in it. So we're bound to wonder, well, what the hell happens when we do create a situation with no reality in it, and when we don't know that there is no reality in it? What kind of a situation is that? And that situation is actually the situation, as I was saying, that we're all in every day. We're in a situation of being in an unreal world that we can't see to be unreal, on the basis of some identity that is also unreal, but which we're never ever going to see to be unreal, because we have this incredible loyalty to it. Kind of loyalty that you would have maybe to an abusive partner or a tyrannical government. If you fall, that's probably a good way of putting it, that if you live under a totalitarian government and you completely fall for all the propaganda that they constantly put out, totalitarian governments always have to put out huge amounts of propaganda, because that's the only way they can stabilize themselves. That's the only way they can carry on existing. When a totalitarian government puts out loads of propaganda and we believe in that propaganda, then we're loyal to the government. We're loyal to the state. We're loyal to it because really we are it, because we've accepted its definition of who we are, what we're all about, what we want to do, what we don't. The state has defined us in this case. So if the state has defined us, we're extensions of the state. So of course we're loyal to the state. That is exactly the situation we're in when we allow thought to define everything. we have this loyalty to the thinking mind because we are extensions of the thinking mind, projections of the thinking mind, linear developments of that thinking mind. So we're puppets of the thinking mind, and a puppet isn't a separate entity from the puppet master. So that is a situation that is very, very hard to break out of. And it's not a good situation, it's not a wholesome situation, because there's no reality in it. And instead of saying there's no reality in it, we could also say that we're not in it because we're not allowed to be in it. Only thought's version of us is allowed to be in it. So what we're doing out of our loyalty, out of our identification with thought's image of us, we are on the other side of the fence. We're against who we really are. So who we really are has become the enemy, or something, possibly something to be ashamed of, because the feelings and the understanding of that comes to who we really are is not consistent with the propaganda. It's like being a traitor to the system. So whenever the true spontaneous side of us shows, that spontaneity is rejected by the system, and it's rejected by us because we are also the system. And this isn't some fluffy kind of philosophical point. We can it's a principle that acts with unceasing brutality upon us in the process of conditioning, so that during the process of conditioning or socialization, we are alienated from who we really are. And yet who we really are is who we really are. So it's going to manifest itself. And when it does, we're going to be trying to repress those manifestations. And if we can't immediately repress them, we're going to feel shame. And what's more, other people who are indoctrinated, conditioned, socialized, if they can detect that we're not being true copies of the system, in other words, if they can see that there's something funny about us, that we're not clone-like, then they're going to take the piss. And that taking the piss will develop into bullying and abuse. And this is something that probably all of us can relate to. I'm not entirely sure if all of us can relate to it, because it can be the case that we're so good at adapting that we never get singled out. So in that case, maybe it's not so easy to relate. But for anyone who has had problems with social adaptation, being what you're supposed to do in order to fit in, then this whole question of bullying and people mocking and taking the piss and attacking you basically makes an awful lot of sense. It's a huge thing when it happens to you. You can't not be aware of it. It's the ugly side of the group mind. When we're totally defined by the group mind and we never put a foot out of place, then maybe we won't see the ugly side of the group mind, but it's there. And were we to look into the matter a bit more, we would realize that just as much as we love approval, which is the carrot, we adapt because we're afraid of the stick. So this is the immense coercive mechanism that's acting upon us to keep us thinking that we are who we aren't, and thinking that the world is what it actually isn't.